Hello guys, welcome to another video. This is part one of the facial proportions tutorial. For part one, we are going to go over the front view, feminine, masculine, and kind of androgynous or like in between. I think it's important because there tends to be a range that we can play with when it comes to character construction and facial proportion construction. And I think it's a fun thing to explore. For the future parts, we're also going to be doing a profile view and then kind of a 3/4 angle so that you can apply the principles that you learn in this tutorial to other angles. But first, we must start with the basics, so let's get started. So before we get into actually drawing the proportions of the face and the head on like an actual character, I wanted to quickly touch on what the proportions look like on like a real skull. And specifically, I want to compare male versus female features as far as the actual bone structure is concerned, because it's going to really inform us on what is important to pay attention to when it comes to adjusting these features when making more male characters or more female characters or somewhere in between, and what kind of direction you need to push things. So let's just start with the male skull, and I want you to notice some proportions for a second. So first I just made a little circle. This is kind of how we're going to start out drawing the face eventually. And if you'll notice, yes, the circle is larger than the actual skull, because when we draw it, we're going to cut off the sides. But the circle that is larger actually gives us a good starting point for proportions. So the first thing, this center line, if you, whoopsies, what is this? Anyway, if you notice, the line goes almost through the center of the circle. Depending on the person, it might be slightly up or down, but for the most part, it's basically cut right through the middle of the circle. And that's the brow line. It's where at the very top of the eye socket ends, I guess, and where the eyebrows are. Next line down is the eye line. So this is going to be a very important one to pay attention to. So depending on your style and your character design, this distance may change. So the rule is to take the size of the eye, specifically the height of the eye, and cut it in half, and then that is the distance between these two lines. Next down, we have the bottom of the nose. So this is not quite all the way down to the bottom of the circle that we have, but it is just slightly offset up from where the bottom of this circle is. And next is this line for the mouth. Sometimes when people draw their underdrawing for a character, they will do another circle down here to indicate the jaw. It's not typically how I will go about drawing a character head, but it is something you can try if you feel like you need to. But for this tutorial, I'm just going to show you how I comprehend the proportions myself, so I'm not going to add the circle. But anyway, it's just something for you to know if you think you want to try that method. But yes, either at the bottom of the line or a little bit below the line is the mouth. This will obviously change depending on which direction in like the gender sort of feminine or masculine features you're going to be going for. Next, the bottom of the chin. You'll notice that this skull in particular, he has like a pretty hefty jaw. So his chin is pretty big. So there's a big distance between the mouth line and the chin line for this guy. I want us to compare these proportions male to female and see how they are different. So I'm just going to duplicate and move this circle over. And then I'm just going to resize it a little bit. Female skulls tend to be a little bit smaller than male skulls, so we're just going to kind of resize to make it fit a little bit better and then see where things are landing. First things first, this eyebrow line. It's generally actually pretty close. The eyebrow line like I said, it might be a little bit offset depending on the individual, but generally it's about in the middle of the circle. Maybe I'll scoot it up just a little bit for the skull, but it's pretty much the same. And then next is the eye line. So this is where, especially if you make your female character's eyes larger, which typically that is how it is. Typically with female characters, you make their eyes larger. So with this one, I mean, for reality, this is pretty close. Again, might need to bring this first line up a little bit. But generally the space between the eyebrow and the eye for females is going to be a little bit larger because their eyes are a little bit larger. So something to definitely keep in mind. A little bit difficult to show that on an actual human skull, but it's good to know when we start drawing, especially stylized drawings. Next is the nose. So this is where things really start to take a turn. Male noses, as you can see, they tend to be a lot longer and larger than female noses. His nose ended up where this line is, but for her, we're going to need to bring this nose and squish it up on the face a little bit more. So her nose is shorter for her proportions. Mouth, again, because the nose is shorter and generally female skulls are just a little bit shorter, especially in this lower region, basically under the eyes. Everything is a little bit more squished up for female skulls. So we're going to need to bring the mouth up a little bit, and now it's a little bit more in line with the very bottom of this circle. And then next is the chin. Obviously her chin is a lot smaller and shorter than his chin, so it has to come up quite a bit. And you can see now that you can compare their proportions and the differences. Again, main differences being this lower half of the face, especially. Shorter skull, nose is higher, mouth is higher, chin is higher, okay? There's a lot less distance between her features than between his features. The next important things to pay attention to are basically the angles. When you're drawing men, you want to be drawing a lot more angles and less curves, and that is especially true, as I'm sure you have already noticed, in the jaw area. So men's jaws tend to be pretty strong angles, and then his chin is also wider and not very dainty, right? Not very dainty. And even his cheekbones, I mean, you don't have to emphasize cheekbones, but you can just notice, like, dang, this guy has some kind of blocky cheekbones. Everything about this man's skull is very kind of like blocky. For the female, it's a lot softer. And so not only is her jaw smaller and shorter, but you can see, even though there's a little angle here, once you put a little bit of skin over top, it's going to be a pretty smooth transition from her jaw to her chin, which comes in a lot more narrower and more delicate. And then even though, like, she has cheekbones too, obviously, but they are a lot more dainty and rounded. So those are the two main things I want you to pay attention to. Another really important thing is the brow. Men's brows kind of stick out a little bit more, and you can see that with this highlight right here. You can see that his brow is sticking out and catching the light a little bit, whereas ladies' brows are a lot more smooth. Like, you can see maybe it's sticking out a little bit, but it's a much more smooth transition, and it's not sticking out nearly as much, whereas his is like boom, boom. That's another thing I wanted to just have you keep in mind, but we will be going over that more in depth in the next part of the tutorial. Let's start drawing some heads or faces. I guess heads. I'm going to start with the female because that's what I am most comfortable drawing is female characters. So I'm going to use the female as kind of my baseline, and then I'm going to show you how I draw a male and the proportions I use, and then we will also be drawing an androgynous, more of an androgynous type of character. But first things first, circle. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle, but you know, kind of a general circle. And then the middle line for the brow line. If you remember in the skull, the middle line of that circle is where the brow is supposed to go. So that's obviously where we're starting. So that is step one, is circle and then brow line. If you right now in Clip Studio Paint, I'm using the symmetry tool, so I kind of don't even need to draw the center line down the middle of the circle. However, usually you would also draw a vertical center line, especially if you are working on another angle, which we will be in some future parts of this tutorial, but we're starting out with just the front on view. Next line down is that eye line, and I'm trying to keep in mind about how high I'm going to draw the eyes. This one honestly does not have to be perfect. I mean, none of this has to be perfect, just as long as it's generally about right and there's no glaring anatomical mistakes, especially since there's a lot of stylization that goes on with the size of the eyes. This eye line in relation to the brow line, you can kind of fudge around with it in how far apart they are. The good thing to keep in mind though is the further apart they are, the more feminine it tends to look. And the closer they are, the more masculine it tends to look. Especially with like really manly kind of gritty guy designs, you know, the designs that are meant to look extremely masculine. You will notice that sometimes there's absolutely no separation between the eyebrow and the eye, and that is kind of a style choice to make a design look a little bit more masculine. So, good thing to know. I went ahead and did a line at the bottom that is the mouth line. If you remember in the skull, the female's mouth ended up almost at basically the bottom of the skull, and then a little bit further up from the bottom of the circle is the nose line. So that's what you can see there. And then what I'm doing is I am kind of cutting the edges off of that circle to indicate the side of the head, and I'm filling in the ears, and the ears are located between that brow line and the nose line. That is generally the height of the ears. For the chin line, I am gonna kind of match the distance between the eye line and the bottom of the nose. So I'm gonna kind of try to get generally that same distance between the mouth and the bottom of the chin. Again, this can be adjusted based on how masculine or feminine you want to go with your design. That will definitely change the size of the chin and also your style. If you have noticed, all of Loish's, not all of them, but many of Loish's female characters have like these itty bitty chins. There's almost no space between the bottom of the mouth and the chins in her designs. And then there's some other artists who I'm thinking of, like Charlie Bowater, where even in her female characters they have like fairly distinguished chins, fairly like prominent chins. So it can kind of depend on your style and kind of the look you want to give your character. So I am just marking the center of the eye and the outside of the eye, and I may have even marked a little bit too wide for this design, but I do tend to draw eyes pretty big. But the very important thing to keep in mind for eye width is that you want about the same width between the eyes as the eye is wide, if that makes sense. So however wide the eye is, it should basically fit between the eyes as well. And I think here in this design, the marks I have are maybe not 100% right, but they give me at least a place to start out. And then I'm also starting to block in the eyebrows. That's one of the first things I like to do before even drawing the eyes. It kind of gives me a guide. And then I just am connecting those spaces to create the eyes. And I'm actually, you can see, making them, as I erase away, a little tiny bit narrower to better fit an eye width between the eyes. And as I'm bringing in the bottom of the eyes, I'm kind of thinking about, okay, the space between the eyes is this much. That means that roughly how high the eye should be about double that space, or like pretty close. Again, does not have to be perfect, and you can fudge with it a bit, but as long as it kind of feels about correct. Now that I blocked some of that in, I wanted to switch the proportion guides to be guides, a guide layer in Clip Studio Paint, so that I can go in and actually draw the face on top of this on a new layer and just use these guides so that I can reuse the guides and adjust them and show you the differences between male and female proportions based on these original guides. Anywho, now I'm going to go in and start drawing the actual features of this character. Starting with the eyebrows again and trying to sculpt the kind of shape that I like with the eyebrows. I kept the eyebrows a little bit thin. Usually females have a little bit thinner eyebrows, but again, kind of a style choice. Because you know I really love my thick-browed gals, so I might make these eyebrows a little bit thicker later. But then moving on to the eyes, following the guides that I had, making her eyes pretty big and rounded, pretty feminine. The kind of more circular and big you make the eyes, the more feminine it tends to look. And then moving the nose, I just indicate a little indication of the nose, the bottom of the nose, down where that line is. And often I will indicate the ball of the nose with a circle when I'm first drawing. And then moving down to the lips, I drew the lips a little bit high. They might need to be adjusted, but just kind of following those guides and lining up the lips with the bottom of that circle. And then rounding out the face to meet the dainty little chin before moving up to the skull and like figuring out the hairline. I mean, everybody has a different hairline, so there's no fast rule for this. The forehead kind of ends if you look at the distance between the eyebrows and the bottom of the nose. That gives you kind of a good indication of how big the forehead is. I wouldn't say it's an exact perfect measurement for every person, but it at least gives you a good place to start. And then also for the neck, I like to keep in mind that females tend to have a slightly longer and a thinner neck, making sure that the neck is definitely thinner than the head. And I also like to emphasize the collarbone because that curve of the collarbone just feels a little bit more Okay, so this female head is basically done. I'm just going to add a couple little details that I enjoy adding and adjust this mouth a little bit down because it felt just a touch too high. But she's basically done. I'm just adding my own little extra touches, like a little blush, a little like lines to indicate details on the nose, you know, just some stylistic preferences before we move on to drawing a male head. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually take the guide layer that we used for the female, and we're going to try and convert that guide into a male guide and see if we can construct a male head out of this guide and see the differences. So here is the guide that we're going to use, and we used it for the female head, so I'm just going to duplicate it and scoot her over here, erase all of this nonsense. And we're going to start drawing a dude after I make some adjustments. So remember the stuff that we adjusted for the skull when we were comparing. So for the male guides, we're going to need to move these eyes closer to the brow because the male eyes are going to be smaller than the female eyes to make sure that it looks a little bit more masculine. Next big thing I'm adjusting is the chin and the jaw, and definitely making that jaw a lot more angular. I'm making the chin longer and moving it down compared to the female chin. So it's a lot longer of a chin and it's a lot more angular of a jaw. Instead of curving from his cheekbones to his jaw, we are actually just kind of doing not a curve, just kind of a straight line down to a more square looking jaw. And then the width of his chin is also a lot wider. So there's not so much curve in the chin, it's just blocky again. Blocky chin. And adjusting this guide even closer to the eyebrows. I really want this guy to read as a guy. So if you draw a lot of females, I'm sure you've run across sometimes the frustration of someone looking at your attempted drawing of a guy and then being like, is that a guy or a girl? This happens a lot with like anime, because the anime males tend to actually look a little bit androgynous, which is interesting, and I guess a stylistic thing to keep in mind that is totally fine. Like, your guys don't have to be Marvel superheroes if you don't want them to be. But to kind of give a big comparison, I'm going to try and make this guy pretty masculine. So we're going with those small eyes, really blocky, square. So obviously I have started blocking in the eyebrows and I'm getting started with the eyes, but I wanted you to notice something that I actually did not have to change all that much with the facial guides. All I had to do was I adjusted the eye line to be closer to the eyebrows. I moved the mouth and the chin down, and even just moving the eyes up actually made the nose longer, so I did not even have to move the nose. So I just moved the eyes up, move the mouth and the chin down, draw that blocky jaw, and suddenly he's looking a lot more masculine already. And then I'm starting to draw in the features, made the eyes a little bit smaller, making the nose bigger, making the nose more blocky, starting to add in that mouth, although I think I'm going to need to move the mouth down even more and maybe make his chin even longer if I really want to emphasize and make this guy a manly man. But you don't even need to change that much, and you can get a really masculine looking character. I know that sometimes if you draw only one gender, it can be a little bit intimidating to draw the opposite gender, but you can do it. It doesn't take that much adjustments, actually. So I am going to move his nose and his mouth down a little bit to really lengthen out his face more. So it wasn't by much, but I think that moving it down a little bit does help. And adding in his skull, I also tried to add a little bit more like angles to his skull, because I think if you were to look at the skull, the actual skulls again, you will notice that there are just like more angles when it comes to male skulls. The skulls that guys have tend to be a little bit more angular, and it's how it is. And then artistically, it also emphasizes masculine design. And then for guy necks, they're much wider necks on guys. So I tend to like to make the necks about the same width as the head. If you look at like really muscly superhero kind of guys, sometimes their necks even bulge out like thicker than their head. If you bring the neck in, it's gonna look a little bit more feminine, or maybe like the guy just doesn't work out or is really thin or something like that. And so, good thing to keep in mind, also adding in the indication of an Adam's apple can help emphasize. It's just like a small detail that helps emphasize this is a dude. For the more androgynous character, I have a little bit of sad news, because there was some sort of recording issue or something, and somehow I wasn't able to capture the actual process of doing the initial drawing for the androgynous character that I'm going to show you, but I will kind of tell you how I went about doing that. So I basically took the guides from the female and the male and I layered them on top of each other so that I could create a new guide that is basically just going right in between each guideline and like splitting the difference. Man, I'm really sad that that footage got lost, but I will do my best to try and explain it. I mean, it's pretty simple, like it's kind of self-explanatory, I guess. It's just kind of splitting the difference between the two guides to make a character that's kind of in between and has both more masculine and feminine features. So here is the more androgynous sort of character in the middle. And like I said, basically all I did was I took both the male and the female guides and I redrew the guidelines like smack dab in between the male and the female. So when it comes to drawing a more androgynous kind of character, it's actually really fun and really interesting because even small changes can push that character in either a more feminine or a more masculine direction, and it's totally up to you. Like there's a big spectrum and a range. Like, do you want this character to be a little bit more towards like the female side? Well, then you will put a little bit more emphasis on some female features while still maintaining maybe a strong jaw. Maybe they have, slightly larger eyes. The way I kind of went about it was still a strong jaw, a little bit more narrow than just like a full-on dude. Still a pretty big nose, but eyes that are kind of in between and not right up against the eyebrow, and a slightly thinner neck, but not as thin as the female neck. So if I wanted to push this character in an even more male direction, maybe I would make that neck a little bit wider, or I would give this character maybe an Adam's apple. And so really like pushing these features one direction and the other. And you can even do this with just one drawing and just experiment and see like, does this make my character look more masculine or feminine? And just these like little changes to the angles and the size of features and the distance between features can make loads of difference. And it gives you the freedom to play around. So for this last little bit, I was just kind of messing around with like, what hairstyle could I give them all? And you could still be able to tell that this is a guy, this is a girl on the left, this is a guy on the right, this is a girl on the left, and then here is someone who's a little bit more androgynous or gender neutral in the middle. And so it was just kind of me having fun. But this basically concludes the first part of the tutorial. This is going to be a kind of tutorial series. So first we tackled the basic straight on view, some pretty much symmetrical straight on view of facial proportions for these, feminine, masculine, and like somewhere in between. For the next video in the series, I am going to go over character profiles, and we're going to convert these 3 characters and what would they look like from the side. So that's going to be coming up pretty shortly. So keep your eyes peeled for that. And I hope you are okay with this kind of a video series. I just knew with everything that I wanted to cover, these videos were going to be kind of long. And so unless I wanted to do like a 2-hour lecture, I was like, yeah, we need to split these videos up. But anyway, don't want to ramble too much. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful. I hope the explanations were clear enough. I did my best. I'm sorry that we didn't get the footage of drawing the middle character. I will definitely, for the next videos, make sure to capture all of the characters because that's pretty frustrating. But have a wonderful rest of your days. Thank you so much for your support and being a wonderful patron. You are literally what make tutorial videos like this possible, and there's definitely no way I could do this without you. So thank you. It means so much that you believe in my work, and I hope this was helpful. And have an amazing week. I will talk to you soon. Bye!